with the Bengal Lancers to conceivably do a land swap, which would allow the Bengal Lancers to move the Bell Road paddock across the street. So whatever you heard, obviously, there was something about it. And secondly, I can assure the honourable member it's not being pursued because the footprint of the school would go on to the Bengal Lancers property, because the footprint would not. Now, turning now to your comments about money for education, and I wanted to just begin to say that, Mr. Chair, that the honourable member would know from our comments is that.
Interruption.
You think I'm going to remember what he said after that?
I'm afraid so. We'll resume again in approximately a half hour.
Order, please. You have reached the moment of interruption. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park. Oh. The honourable member for Kings West.
Yes, just by luck of the draw, her name was associated with today's topic for a late debate, and I'm not sure if there's a lot of agriculture in Clayton Park, to be to be quite honest about it. And I'm sure in terms of late debate, the Minister of Transportation is probably glad that we've got off the roads theme and heading on a topic actually that certainly very important to my riding and very important to, in fact, the province, and that is the value of agriculture to the Nova Scotia economy. And I'm not sure if over the past 5 or 6 years of this government and perhaps governments for some time have recognized the true value of agriculture and the economic stability and the growth that it plays to rural areas. Rural Nova Scotia has indeed been going through very challenging times. I know just this week I looked at the unemployment rate in the valley, and it actually at the end of March was at 9.7%. So it shows that we are suffering in rural Nova Scotia, and I feel that agriculture can be one of those areas that can breathe some new life into rural Nova Scotia. One of the things that our party is taking a look at, and I think and are a strong advocate of, and not in any way to diminish the Department of Fisheries, but in fact is to have a standalone Department of Agriculture, and of course then in turn a Department of Fisheries. And I think that's the kind of emphasis and that's the kind of thinking that farmers would then see. Government is with us, government is behind us. They're going to be a major player in helping the industry go forward. And in fact, very often it is the farmers, in fact, who bring pressure upon government to move. It was very interesting that when I arrived here at the House in September of 2003, 5 months had elapsed since the beginning of the VSE. And in fact, it was the member from Hants East that in fact introduced a motion for debate on the BSE crisis. And in fact, it was the very first topic that I spoke about. I guess you remember your first speech here, or first time you speak in the legislature. And in fact, it was the BSE crisis because it had become very familiar to me as I made the rounds among the agricultural community of Kings West. So it is too bad that government has to be moved by the pressure of farmers. And as I said, the BSE was was a case in point. And very often, throughout the past couple of years, government has generally used the federal program sort of over and over, as opposed to saying, we have a crisis here, we need to have a Nova Scotia solution to this crisis. And in fact, once again, that would demonstrate clearly to farmers that government is a willing, able, and capable partner to move forward. And it is one that continues to, I think, come back and resonate with the farm community, and is still very, very much on the tip of their tongues anytime we're talking to farmers, because 50% of the farms in Nova Scotia, and I would say all of 18 counties, in fact, ruminant farming is a small part or an essential part of the farm operation. So it is a big aspect of farming. And in that regard, I thought I would use this opportunity to sort of take a look at farming, as we often do here in this House. We try to put a face on a business, an industry, a cause. And one of the people who was actually prominent in the BSE debate and question, and went around the province on the task force, was Anthony Van Ostrom. And Anthony, as my colleague from Kings North also knows, in fact, I think he resides in the member opposite riding, and his son farms in my riding. But he was one that was reaching that point in his farm life, and he has been a big player. Anthony has been a big player, without question, in the beef industry throughout the Valley and indeed Nova Scotia. And the thing that perplexed and really hit Anthony was the fact that here were the prices going down, the desire to use his land base as a future cattle farm was now, of course, in jeopardy because of BSE. And in fact, his land today doesn't carry the same value as it did. And he raised a really important question in the farm community, in my view, and that was, what about the future of this land? One of Canada's prime pieces of agricultural real estate. We have Class A soils on the valley floor, and they do need to be protected. And he started to talk about, well, here my farm was going to be my retirement. It now has substantially less value. What about a land bank? What about a way of registering the land with the province and getting a satisfactory compensation that would look after my retirement years, but also, and the legacy that he would leave would be to keep that land for the future in agriculture. So Anthony sort of drew upon the crisis to challenge us as to how we can keep the land when it can no longer provide an adequate income and a way of life. Another farmer that I have met in recent weeks is Larry Lutz. And Larry is the kind of person that I see is the face of the future of apple farming, orchard farming in the Annapolis Valley. And I was certainly glad to see in the budget that there is at least a small amount being set aside or is in the budget for orchard renewal. And I think that's a very, very positive step. But Larry was the farmer because he believes in innovation, in seeking out new ideas, best practices, and wanted to see one of the real pioneer companies in the valley, Scotia Gold, which he joined about 10 years ago. He wanted to see that company embrace farmers in sort of a cooperative approach, and that's what Scotia Gold has developed, with about 25 to 30 orchard farmers now tying themselves into Scotia Gold to buy their rootstock, their fertilizer, their pruning implements, and then in turn will sell their apples to Scotia Gold, which will provide them with marketing opportunities. But Larry believes the future perhaps is in specializing, and he was the farmer or the apple specialists that brought the Honeycrisp apple to the valley. And Honeycrisp is probably going to become the apple of the future in our area. And one other farmer I'd like to take a moment about, I don't have much time here, is Vernon Saunders, a 72-year-old farmer who still has a thriving mixed farm operation. And his big concern, since he doesn't have sons to take over the farm, he's wondering about the future of his farm in relation to where will the market be? Where will I market my crops? And the other one, farm succession, because it is very, very difficult to get young people in the farm industry, and that's certainly one of the challenges that the province will face and the agricultural industry has to face. So I'd just like to wrap up my short time here by perhaps saying that one of the good things that's happened this year was an education summit, and I think the same kind of idea perhaps for agriculture to get the best in the province to come together and look at staking out a future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognized honourable member Kings North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to read the resolution. Be it resolved that this government actively promote and pursue agriculture development in Nova Scotia. Now, I would admit to the honourable member who introduced this resolution that I'd have some sympathy with it if it read that we do more to promote and pursue agriculture development in Nova Scotia, or we continue to promote and pursue agricultural development in Nova Scotia. But as it stands, the resolution implies that this government is doing nothing to promote and pursue agricultural development in Nova Scotia, that it's inactive. And this, of course, would be news to the members' federal cousins up in Ottawa, who've signed an agricultural policy framework with this government that looks at developing agriculture in the areas specifically of branding, of renewal. He talked about the Orchard Renewal Program, of business risk management, of food safety. That doesn't sound to me like we're doing nothing, that we're inactive. But we don't even need to go to the honourable member's federal cousins. We could go back to his provincial forebears, because in a memorandum of understanding between a deputy minister and the minister Sandra Joly on municipal reform, one of the benefits that they saw in municipal reform back there was, and I'll read the statement, more efficient government by reducing the artificial distinction between towns, cities, and rural municipalities, reducing the incentive to build outside cities and towns. If Sandra Joly, the honourable member's forebearer, if he's talking about the need for rural development, he obviously needs to do some rural development, since the Liberals were the one that instituted this municipal reform with the stated goal of undermining rural development. In fact, they're very successful at it, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the statistics for the rural counties in Nova Scotia, you'll find that the honourable member's forebears of the Liberal Party were extremely successful in undermining rural development. So I find it a bit hypocritical that the member would stand up here and talk about the need for rural development, for agricultural development, in light of what her party did, what his party did back in '93 with municipal reform, with the very stated goal of undermining the rural economies, of undermining rural life in the province. And I'll table this document, Mr. Speaker. So back to the policy framework. The province and the federal government have signed an agriculture policy framework, and specifically they're looking at branding, at renewal, at business risk management, and food safety. And the department is involved in this field. It's involved in crop insurance, in field extension services, and product development. The honourable member admitted that we're involved in an orchard renewal program. Said a few dollars thrown at it. $250,000 is more than a few dollars. And I know that the fruit growers are very, very happy to get this money and excited about it. Again, this doesn't sound to me like we're doing nothing, does it, honourable member? It sounds like we're involved in various things. The Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board, the honourable member would know that that's a very active organization trying to support and help farmers with capital. The work on the U.S. border reopening I've been at meetings with agricultural ministers and with our own agricultural minister up in Ottawa, where this was the topic of discussion, and much effort was put in to trying to open up the borders and to supporting our beef producers in the meantime. The encouragement of investment and immigration. Again, do these sound like we're doing nothing, that we're inactive? We're looking at bringing in investment and immigration, and many of these immigrants, some of these immigrants at least, will be involved in the farming community and help enrich the farm life of this province. The promotion of brand Nova Scotia and the taste of Nova Scotia to encourage people to buy Nova Scotia products, again, helping our farmers. The support for education in agriculture at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College. And those of you who have been at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College are aware of the wonderful programs that are there. Many of the farmers in my community, their children have gone to the Agricultural College, and they've come back and they've used many of the insights that they've received at the college to help further the work of agriculture. And again, the province is involved in supporting this very worthy educational institution. That doesn't sound like we're inactive. That doesn't sound like we're doing nothing. In fact, it sounds like we're doing something very important. Support for 4-H development. The honourable member wasn't in the House when we first were elected, but there was discussion then about 4-H, and the members all joined together. The honourable member from Guysborough, I remember, and myself, we made a strong case for 4-H development, and the government has funded 4-H development, and young people receive very valuable training in various products. I've been to various 4-H fairs in the canning arena, and the various 4-H groups compete against each other, and they learn at a very early age some very important lessons in taking care of animals, in growing crops, in working together, and in farming. In farm safety, too, at the 4-H. There's an emphasis in 4-H, and the Women's Institutes have picked this up on farm safety, so that as these young people become involved in driving the machinery and working the machinery on farms, they'll do so in a very safe way. So again, the involvement we have in funding 4-H does not sound to me like we're doing nothing. It sounds to me like we're doing something, a very important thing. A new venture that I want to talk about to dispute the honourable member's resolution is the Bioresources Techno-Venture Centre at the Agritech Park. Now, this is a very, very important initiative, Honourable Mr. Speaker, because one of the things that we know we need to do in the agricultural sector is we need to move up the food chain, as it were, and add value-added products. So not just the primary products, but add on to it. One of the prime examples of someone doing this successfully in my area is the Rand family, who've created a cheese factory, Fox Hill Cheeses. And this is a wonderful way of adding value-added products. They've taken the primary product. They now have this wonderful store. I was there at the opening of it. They sent out about 100 invitations, expecting maybe 100, 200 people at the most. They had 700 people that opening day come in to buy the cheese. It's wonderful cheese. If you're ever up in Port Williams area and you want to buy some cheese and you want to buy some really good cheese, go to the Fox Hill Cheese Factory. You'll find it a treat, and you'll go back there time and time again. And this is what this organization is going to do. It's going to help various farmers to move up that value-added chain, because the more we move up that chain, the more money we'll retain in the province, the better off our farmers will be. So all these, I could go on and on, Mr. Speaker, about all the various things that this government is involved in that helps agriculture. And the resolution really makes no sense as it stands. As I said before, if it said we could do more, I could buy that. We can do more. We should do more. If it said we should continue to do what we're doing, yes, let's continue. But to claim that we're inactive in supporting agriculture is patently false. And as I said, somewhat hypocritical, coming from a member whose party had this stated interest in municipal reform of undermining the rural economies of our province, as I've stated before. So honourable member, the honourable member's resolution falls. It can't stand because we are doing things. Now, there are areas that we should do more in, and I was hoping to hear some of this, but I didn't hear it. I raised this issue myself in late debate, what we should be mooring in. We need to be more aggressive with the retailers. Our farmers need to have a place to sell their produce. If they don't have a place to sell their produce, then it doesn't matter what we do, we're in trouble. The farmers are in trouble. Another area that's worthy of debate, that should have some debate, is protection of farmland. That's certainly an area that would be worthy of debate. But I didn't hear any of these fresh ideas coming from this member. I didn't hear anything really of substance in terms of what we could be doing more of that we're not doing now. We're doing many good things now. We can do more. And so the resolution as it stands, I submit again, falls because as it stands, it says we're doing nothing, and we are very, very active, and we can always do more, and hopefully will do more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to make a few comments. I want to say, to the credit, I think, of the member for Kings West, I don't think he took quite so adversarial approach as the honourable member that from Kings North who just sat down. Heaven knows the member for Kings West certainly had lots of room to maneuver if he had intended to attack the government in any claim they might make about how they've acted to support agriculture. I did read the document from former Minister Sandy Jolly under the Liberals. It is kind of a mind twister about lack of incentive to build outside of, reducing the incentive to build outside cities and towns, and then in brackets, which imposes long-term servicing costs. Actually, something I'd like politicians to turn their mind to, Mr. Speaker, is the idea that by keeping people in rural Nova Scotia and rural Canada, we can actually reduce those servicing costs. People who live in rural Canada live there, number one, because they like it. They like the rural environment. They'll live there quite comfortably with fewer services than people, because of large numbers in urban areas, require. I mean, there's not a question of that we like to have them, but you have to have them. Now, I live on a gravel road in a fairly rural section of a fairly rapidly growing urban area, and no sidewalks, even though I pay for sidewalks 3 miles away in the village of Enfield, and I see that as a safety issue, and I don't mind that at all, but certainly. If I can have garbage collection and fire protection, I'm very pleased to live where I live. I cut my own firewood, try to grow a bit of a garden as much as I can do that, and I have enough space that I don't have anybody really on top of me, and so that's the world I've chosen to live in, Mr. Speaker, and I worry. I worry about the ability to keep to keep rural Nova Scotia and rural Canada as a vibrant place for Canadians to want to live and to be able to live and raise their families. I'll table this. This is from Stats Canada, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia's total gross farm receipts were $460 million in 2000, while operating expenses reached $389 million. While factors such as the commodities they produced, the prices they received, and the weather they had to deal with made each farmer's situation different in general. Expenses rose slightly faster than revenues. 5 years earlier, at 1995 prices, receipts were $384 million and expenses $328 million. So the picture for agriculture in Nova Scotia, the census counted 3,923 farms in Nova Scotia in 2001, down 11.9% from 4,453 5 years earlier. So when I asked the minister during budget estimates about his vision, did he have a vision for agriculture in the province? he really stumbled around trying to give me an answer to that question, and it made it pretty clear to me that the minister had no vision for agriculture, for the potential of agriculture to bring sustainability and security to families and communities in this province. The minister had no vision. And I want to say that if the province doesn't look at rural Nova Scotia and agriculture in particular, and the members have mentioned about the value-added side, which I was glad to hear them say, that agriculture has the most potential to sustain communities, to generate wealth, and to keep young families there. And there has been absolutely nothing, for the most part, done by this government to ensure that. And since 1999, there's been nothing but cuts and abuse to that department, not to mention to rural Nova Scotia generally. Now, even if we take the member for Kings West, he talked about his first speech in the House at the emergency debate on the BSC issue, and probably appropriate that he would raise that because Nova Scotians spend $80 million bringing beef from outside the province to feed us here, Mr. Speaker. $80 million on that one commodity. And if we were to realize even part of that by access to our own market here and price to farmers, and the member for Kings North has gone down this road a bit about local and the problems, the difficulties at the retail sector. And $80 million in one commodity in rural Nova Scotia, and what that would mean to keeping young families there, keeping a school open, being able to attract a doctor. And Kings County, those members from Kings County, should recognize that Kings County is an example of what agriculture can do as a base for an economy, and government should look at that and see how much of that can we apply to other areas. And any notion of economic development, you should start with your strengths. You should start with what are the resources that we have and how can we build an economy based on those resources. And that's something that I don't see happening. I see cuts federally and provincially, the Nepan Research Station, the production technology at the Department of Agriculture. Instead of investing in agriculture and investing in research, we're going the complete other direction, Mr. Speaker. And even those jobs, I mean, there are a lot of men and women who go through the Nova Scotia Agricultural College. They get jobs in the private sector. They all don't go back to the farm. And those people have formed a basis of an economy connected to agriculture that provides salaries into the economy and helps as another component for sustaining those communities. Now, it wasn't my intention to stand here and hammer the government. I've done that on occasion. I want to say that I was pleased after the beef rally last fall that the government came forward and helped beef and producers of other ruminants. And I don't think I ever stood anywhere publicly to acknowledge that. So I want to take this opportunity. I want to take this opportunity to do that, so the members are aware that that was important to me to say that. There are people who are trying to do other things in rural Canada. There was an announcement the other day that in Manitoba they've opened up a wind farm, and actually along with the private side, investment and, the initiative to try to make money, help from the government, but also for farmers, for landowners who actually are being paid for having those wind turbines on their property. So they refer to it as the, I'll just read the first paragraph, first sentence, Mr. Speaker. Premier Gary Dewar today joined the community of St. Leon to officially start harvesting Manitoba's newest crop, wind harvested through the commissioning of the province's first wind turbine generator. So there are those things that other jurisdictions are doing. We do have to look at programs for new entrants into the industry, some type of intergenerational transfer to get older, retiring farmers out and younger farmers in. There is potential in this industry, but somebody has to see that have a vision and see there's potential there and come up with programs to affect that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Time allotted for the debate has expired. At 6:30, the House will resume itself back into a committee on the whole House on supply. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to call the committee back to order, and we'd like to recognize the government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, would you please call the estimates of the Minister of Education?
Thank you, Government House Leader. At this time, we'll call the Minister of Education to continue with the estimates on the Department of Education. We would at this time, Minister, your staff is coming in. Okay, thank you. I would like to recognize the member from Halifax Fairview. Member, you can continue if you wish.
Yes, I'd like to continue. I would like to continue as long as the minister doesn't say that he can't answer till his staff arrive. I'm sure they're not far away. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, rather, in this year's budget document, there's contained the following paragraph. It says, quote, "As promised, we will soon pilot up to 20 free and full-day activity-based preschool programs for 4-year-olds in areas that meet the following criteria. Where there is known demand, where there is a lack of readily available daycare spaces, and where existing schools have room to accommodate additional students," end of quote. Mr. Chairman, this pre-kindergarten program is a bit mysterious. We know very little about it. My first question for the minister is this program funded in the budget, and if so, where would we find it in the budget documents?
Thank you, member, for the question. And at this time, I'll recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, the preschool program is something that we've talked about for some time. Actually, we talked about it last year and said that we would be setting it up. We have actually engaged a person who was seconded from the Department of Community Services to do the organization. He read the paragraph, and I just want to clarify a little bit. Where's Daryl? Is he coming? One of the questions was, where is the line for the preschool?
Oh, it's October. It's the same as the first one?
No, but where is it in the book?
Oh.
Mr. I apologize for that. The issue, whether we're going to get 20 of those up and running this year, quite frank, is 20 is our intent. Will they all be running the 1st September? The answer is likely no, because there's a fair bit of logistical arrangements that have to take place. For example, if you are providing these in a public school, then the issue of how do the children get to school is probably, and if they're not a member of, if they aren't going to public school, if it's not part of the public school in Nova Scotia, then there are some other issues we have to work out. Secondly, we have to be concerned that what we are doing is to go to places where the preschool program is most wanted and needed. In other words, there are some communities that are perfectly well served by existing preschool program, and therefore we would sooner put these pilots in areas where that opportunity for preschool education is not there. Having said that, what we need is the line item for pre-primary. Where is it? We are allowing the school boards to propose sites to us. We're not going to, and what we have done actually is we'll be allocating these preschool programs, the numbers of pilots to school boards, and they will make that determination. The line item for that is 1.065 million, and it appears on page, where is it?
Oh, where does it appear? That's with it. That's with the public schools.
It's under public schools.
Page 5.6.
Page 5.6.
English program services.
And it would be English program services. And if you look under that, you'll see community-based education, 728, pre-primary programs, 750
It's changed.
and change.
The member from Halifax, Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'm particularly interested in, of course, is where are those programs going to be located? Now, the minister has said that they're consulting with the school boards. Now, I understand, for example, that the Halifax Regional School Board has come back to the department with a list or is on the verge of doing that. Now, I assume that that's happening in the other school boards. What I'm looking for is as much information as the minister can provide about the geographic distribution of these 20 pilot projects around the province, and does the minister in fact know today where those 20 sites are, and if not, when will he know?
Thank you for your question, and I will direct that to the Minister of Education. Minister, you have the floor.
We do know, Mr. Chair, where the sites will, in which boards the sites will go. Where they will be located within the boards, we are not confirmed. Now, the honourable member has said that Halifax has submitted potential sites, and I will have to look to see. I don't know what they are. I know that there are 4 sites that have been located in Halifax or allocated to Halifax.
Thank you, Minister. The member from Halifax, Fairview.
The minister has indicated that the geographic distribution of the 20 sites is known. I wonder if the minister could list by school board where those 20 sites are going to be.
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Education.
The information is not in my briefing book, Mr. Chair. I'll have to table that for you tomorrow if that is okay.
Thank you, Minister. The member from Halifax, Fairview.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. Of course, that's all we can ask for. If the minister doesn't have the answer that he agrees to produce it, that's fine. If there are 4 sites allocated to the Halifax Regional School Board, does the department know where those are going to be, and if so, what are they?
Thank you, member, for the question. Direct the question to the Minister of Education.
Mr. Chair, the honourable member has indicated that Halifax has submitted some potential sites. I haven't seen those sites, so in terms of decision being made about where they are, the answer is no.
Thank you, Minister. The member from Halifax, Fairview.
Thank you. To be precise, I just want to remind the minister that said they've either submitted a list or are on the verge of submitting a list. So it may be that it's not into the department yet. What I'd like to know is whether the department will accept the school board's list without modification, without politics, or will there be some further process within the department where the department decides whether they're going to accept the board's list or not?
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our intention was to accept the school board's suggestion now, and I say that is our intention, and that's how we're going to proceed. You know, for example, if they had 4 sites in one neighborhood, then there might be some question about the selection criteria used.
Thank you, Minister. The member of Halifax, Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, needless to say, there are many, many, many people who are very interested in knowing what the final decision is on these 20 pilot project sites for pre-kindergarten. When can we expect a public announcement about which 20 sites have been selected across the province? The question is, when will we know?
The Minister of Education.
Thank you, Chair. Once all the boards make their submissions, then we will put out a list of the sites that are selected.
The member from Halifax, Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The sum that mentioned by the Minister for this fiscal year is, I think he said $1.056 million, which is a very substantial sum. Clearly, the department expects to spend that money in this fiscal year, or else they wouldn't have allocated it in the budget. Will these programs be up and running in September? And if not, how many does the department expect will be up and running in the September of this fiscal year?
The Minister of Education.
I don't think, quite frank, Mr. Chair, there will be 20 up and running in September, and we have said that consistently. That's not a change in our position. For example, as I said, it sounds like a very straightforward and easy thing to do, but you may find, we indeed may find that some boards may ask to delay. Actually, the advice that we received from school boards, the couple of times actually with school board officials that I've discussed the concept with them, they have advised us to make haste slowly. And we are doing that to make sure that we do it correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, I think, of course, that's the right way to go. I don't think for a second this is an easy thing to do. If it's going to be done at all, it needs to be done right. What I would encourage the department to do and the minister to do is share as much information as possible with the affected communities, because to date there has been, frankly, very little, a great deal of interest and very little information. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to share the rest of the time available with the member for Cape Breton-Nova, who would like to deal with another subject that's very dear to my heart, which is the school breakfast program. But before I do, I can't sit down without saying the minister said that the sites will be selected based on where they're wanted and needed. And, Minister, they're wanted and needed in the constituency of Halifax-Fairview. I have at least 3 elementary schools that have a population that could use this very much. And I'll mention for the records, Burton Ettinger, Fairview Heights Elementary, and Chebucto Heights Elementary. The neighborhoods around those schools very much want and need this opportunity. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll pass it over to the member for Cape Breton-Nova.
Certainly, we'd like to thank the member from Halifax-Fairview for his comments and his lobbying attempt. It's always in order. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce to the committee the member from Cape Breton-Nova. Member time is 6:42, and the end in term will be 7:09. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. My question for the Minister of Education is, in the announcement on the...
We're done at 6:50.
Is,
We are done at 6:50.
is 3... Well, let me start again, Mr. Chair. What I'm going to ask is, I'm going to ask the Minister of Education, in the announcement the other day in the education budget is $3.5 million for school-based initiatives. And in that announcement was $750,000 to introduce a provincial-wide breakfast program, breakfast for learning program. I would like to know and the number of elementary schools within the province of Nova Scotia, and how many breakfast programs that'll mean in the province of Nova Scotia.
Thank you. The Minister of Education.
Thank you, Chair. There are 312 elementary schools in the province, and 312 elementary schools would be eligible for breakfast, this program.
Does that include the Peter 12?
I just want to go back on that figure. I don't want to mislead the honourable member. But if there are P to 12 schools or P to 8 schools that are not classified, quote, as elementary or primary schools, then the P to 6 population would also be eligible.
Thank you, Minister. And before I recognize the member from Cape Breton Nova, I'd like to make a correction. Your time will be complete at 6:51. You have the floor, the member from Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. So I'm trying to figure out of the $750,000, how much of that money will be allocated? Will it go through the different school boards, or where will that money be earmarked? How much for each school board in the province of Nova Scotia?
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows, and certainly up in his area, they have had, some schools have had an extremely fine breakfast program run by volunteers, and they do have a person in that board who looks after it, whom I've met on a couple of occasions, and might add that she never ceases to, but every time I see her, she does raise that program. And I might also remember that the member from Cape Breton West did mention that from time to time as well, although he is, and he would know that. What it will be done, the money will be given to school boards, who will allocate it as they see fit to the P to 6 population. You know, is it entirely going to fund breakfast programs for every school student in the province? Probably not. But will it provide a good thing? And you mentioned 750, but I want to remind the honourable member is that we were able to reinvest some money, I think it was in March or February, and we gave $400,000 to school boards if they needed to buy a fridge or a stove or do a little physical upgrading to an existing breakfast program facility. Then that money was available there. But the money will flow to the school boards, who will flow it out.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Cape Breton Nova.
Well, what I'm trying to find out, is there a specific amount of money that will go to each school board? Is it designated that one school board will get $50,000, another school board will get $75,000 based on the needs of elementary school kids that are in there? And the minister did bring up a point there about breakfast programs in the schools, and I'm quite familiar with the lady from the Cape Breton District Victoria School Board, because I actually met her a long time ago when she first took over. She's a nutritionist, and she has some great ideas, but it's funny how time goes by. When I approached the school board 11 years ago, they wouldn't have nothing to do with breakfast for learning programs in the schools, and I told her the minister doesn't know that aspect of it, but I've served over 36,000 breakfasts in 11 years. So I'm just trying to figure out the cost-wise, because I do know what it costs in the Breakfast for Learning program. So what I'm trying to say is this money that's earmarked for the school boards and money that comes from the Canadian Foundation for Living Breakfast for Learning program, some of the money comes in to the schools, and other breakfast programs like the one that I run at home comes from the Canadian Living Foundation. So that money that's already marked there, and some of I must say, some of the businesses in the Cape Breton region have been very, very good with donating money, and I know the businesses that donate, and I keep a close eye on that, and I frequent those businesses because of that reason, and I know that they do that. So I'm trying to figure out how the money is going to be allocated. Like, if they have funding from the Canadian Living Foundation Breakfast for Learning program, if they have X numbers of dollars from that program, and the school has X numbers of dollars in the school board, who in the school board is going to be making that decision to where that funding is going?
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, the money will be allocated according to the number of P to 6 students in each of the school boards. How they allocate it and work around great programs like breakfast, the Breakfast for Learning programs by Canadian Living Foundation, that will be determined by the school boards.
Thank you, Minister. The member from Cape Breton Nova.
Okay, so it's actually going to be up to the school board to decide how that money is going to be spent. I'm just trying to figure out, like, would you have any idea of how many children in the P to 6 school system have received breakfasts since the Breakfast for Learning program in last year? Would you have any idea of how many children have been given breakfasts in the school boards across Nova Scotia within the last year?
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Education.
No, Mr. Chair. We have never asked for or received that information, although it may be in the monthly meetings of school boards or something like that, but we've not asked for that information.
Thank you, Minister. The member from Cape Breton, Nova.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's, I think that would be an interesting, Mr. Minister, and I do, and mind you, I think this is a great initiative by the province of Nova Scotia. This is long overdue, especially in certain areas where the unemployment is so high, and single parents and low-income families can benefit greatly from this. You can't train the brain unless you have the fuel for it. So I just worry about, I mean, how this is it's going to be distributed by the school board, and I'm wondering, like a coordinator like we have in Cape Breton, will she have access to say that there's so much needed in this area and so much needed in this area? And I'm just wondering about another thing in there. Introduce and also there's a healthy eating strategy involved in that. So will the same persons that are being involved in the breakfast programs be involved in the healthy eating strategy for these elementary schools?
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Education.
I think there'll probably be some overlap, and the reason I say that, Mr. Chair, is that clearly, if we're talking healthy eating, then breakfast, the breakfast menu would be part of that as well. But the overall direction, my experience with most of the breakfast programs, Mr. Chair, is that they are run by volunteers and staffed by volunteers. I know the one in sort of in the neighborhood that I live in town of Truro. My wife goes down there every Friday morning and serves breakfast at that one, but we would not expect the volunteers to be the healthy living, quote, people. They would take advice, and I'm quite frank, I know that most of the volunteers are concerned about healthy living. There'd probably be a fairly close connect, but the person to be responsible for healthy living would I expect, be paid staff, either through the school board or through the Department of Health Promotion, or somebody.
Well, thank you, Minister. I'd like to inform the member from Cape Breton Nova you had approximately 10 seconds, and I guess in saying that we'll have to. I'm sorry. We have to be. We have to watch the clock very closely. But I do thank you, sir, for your questions this afternoon. At this time, I would like to recognize a member of the Liberal caucus, the member from Halifax Clayton Park. Member, you have only approximately 9 minutes in turn, and that will end the estimates for today. So you have the floor.
Are you sure we're not going to 7:09?
That's 7:09. Yes, I'm having some difficulty today with that time. I've taken over the chair.
Good question.
But always, thank you, member. Always stand to be corrected.
Thank you very much. Okay,
order, please. You've had some difficulty with the time this afternoon, I do agree, but you do have the floor, member. Please carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. When I finished my questioning earlier, we were talking about the gymnasiums and auditoriums in schools, and the minister finished up the time with really a list of schools he's been to with openings and ribbon cuttings, essentially. Schools across the province where new gymnasiums and extra enhancements for the community were part of the school buildings. And I think really what it does is reinforces the point I was trying to make, and that is that all communities see the schools as central, whether you're in the city of Halifax or in a small town. They see them as central facilities for the community as well. And I think that when I mentioned the word silo, silo thinking, it's that education and the provision of the school building shouldn't stand alone, and the money shouldn't all come from your department, but it is a government initiative or a government vision to improve communities and to improve culture, to improve physical fitness. Those are sort of overriding themes of government. I've heard this government speak of them as well, particularly the Health and Wellness Initiative, which has come into play in the last couple of years with the establishment of the Office of Health Promotions. But if we don't provide funds to the communities, then we're leaving them behind the 8 ball as they try to get going on these initiatives. And if we're taking out facilities, we should be ensuring that the new buildings have those enhancements in them. And again, I point to enhancements because, for example, the Halifax West School, we could go to that, which was only opened in 2002. I believe maybe the beginning of 2003. When that school opened, it has a full-size gymnasium for a high school, but with 1,600 students, it has no extra time whatsoever for the community. It's fully booked. It's programmed all the time. And that's great for the community. In fact, the school themselves, I think, would like an extra gymnasium, and I think have made a request through the school board for that. I don't know if that's come through. You might answer that if you've ever heard of the request for a second gymnasium at Halifax West, but that's for their own needs. Right now, certainly, there's no ability for the school to have their facilities available to the community. And what I guess my challenge to the minister, more than a question, is to address the question of how your capital spending and program helps or could be the catalyst for other government initiatives like the health and wellness, like culture in our communities, that again, you could be the catalyst to provide those facilities with their help. So could you talk about that, about getting away from that individual department silo?
Yes, and before I recognize the minister, it's getting quite loud here in the chamber, and we want to give the member an opportunity to ask the question, and equally, we'd like to give the minister an opportunity to hear the question for an appropriate answer. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just to continue on with that, clearly the provision of gymnasiums, large gymnasiums, and ample gymnasiums is crucial, and I don't doubt that. However, she's quite correctly pointed out that many of these things are community-school partnerships, and I think back, and I suppose the history of school construction. Not saying that it shouldn't be changed or couldn't be changed in the past number of years. And let's start back with all of the 3P schools, which was the previous ones. And quite frank, they when they were building those things, they tinkered with classroom size and increased that, and did a variety of things and come up with nice facilities. But I don't see any of those that had an auditorium. And I say that. So what I'm saying is that the auditoriums that were built at St. Pat's and QEH historically would have been built by the city, and that was a good thing. I mean, because the city built schools in those days, and when the government got into the business of school construction, then it was faced with probably a dilemma. How do you serve the needs of the many in the most effective way? And so when we came into government, the direction of government to the Department of Education was to develop a footprint for schools, whether it's a junior high school or an elementary school or a high school, whatever it happens to be. And indeed, I can think of a couple schools in the province that I have visited where we actually used the footprint that had been developed under one of the public-private contractors, but we had to go and get permission to do that type of thing. So we weren't, as government, we're trying to provide quality facilities to meet the educational needs of the students. And I think, Mr. Chair, is that the record of this government has been very good in that regard. No, I'm talking about meeting the needs for the education program. Now, I understand that it would be real nice to build a school that is going to take the needs of every community into consideration, or the wants of every community. But, there is an issue of accountability and responsibility that government has when it comes to using precious, and I will say precious, education dollars in the most efficacious way. And that's exactly what we have done. And that's why we say to communities, we are perfectly happy and would like to work with you to provide a facility that exceeds the standard pattern, like, as they say they did in those schools that I mentioned in Pictou County, and the one in our area, and the one in South Colchester, and wherever it is, that they've opted and say, look, we're not happy with that size of gym. We want a bigger gym. Or we don't like the size of the music room. Therefore, what we want to do is we want to change the cafeteria and the auditorium and turn it into a cafetorium so you can do all of these things. And those adjustments, we've made any adjustments that we can, as long as it is sort of within the financial envelope that is allocated for this. The other thing I would suggest, Mr. Chair, is that as the honourable member knows, there is a process through which these capital projects go, first at the school board, at the local school, then the school board, and then it goes to a provincial committee. And I can tell you that you know, if the decision is by somebody, including the government, to turn these into, turn them, that's a negative thing. I don't mean it negatively, but to build them to a standard that would meet every community need, I'm going to tell you, there's going to be a lot less new schools in this province.
Thank you, Minister. At this time, I'd like to recognize the member. You have the floor. Carry on, member.
Thank you. Certainly, Mr. Chair, I do hear the minister saying scarce resources means that we have to identify our basic needs and just go with that when we're building schools. But I think it bears repeating that the communities across this province all have that same need, and the need to foster the arts and culture within the school are helped immeasurably by having a stage and having a performance area. And again, the P3 schools do have that. I believe most of them are built with, at least the ones here in Halifax, have this cafetorium idea, the cafeteria combined with a stage that can be used, and on the other side it's used with the music room. So they had recognized the need for some kind of performance area. And I think it is important, I just see it in every school and every community struggling to raise the money to provide those embellishments to the school. And really, the fact that it's occurring in every community, and many of them, I'd say most of them, have been able to somehow raise the money within their own communities, is great for the school board, and in the Department of Education you've saved money, but it puts a huge onus on communities, and it's very difficult to ask councils, municipal levels of government, and individuals to provide those facilities. I think what I'm urging the minister to do is to talk with other members, other departments, other members of your cabinet, and find ways, like find creative ways where you work together on common goals. So, yeah. That's what I'm saying, is that it shouldn't all come out of the Department of Education budget, but there should be monies allocated for this health and wellness and for those kind of facilities. Now, I'm going to move a little bit further. We don't have a lot of time. So talking about the building of new schools, I wanted to raise an issue that I think deserves some attention. And I don't know if the minister is going to be able to provide me with any figures on this. But I have been told that when your schools are constructed, your new schools, there's a 10% holdback to cover deficiencies in your buildings. So, you know, this is to say anything that goes wrong in the first year, you can turn to the contractors and say, well, this didn't work or that didn't work. And you've got a 10% holdback that you can, you know, hopefully, I guess, use as a lever to make sure that this work gets done. Well, I'm told that often the companies walk from the 10% holdback, and that the Department of Education or a TPW, whoever builds a school, doesn't get back in time, doesn't force the issue, and doesn't make the changes that are necessary. So I'm wondering if the minister could speak from experience with the many schools that you've dealt with now over your tenure as Minister of Education, and say if you are aware of a difficulty that comes because of that. Is this a trend, or did it happen once? Can you give me some idea what's going on that holdback?
The Minister of Education.
Thank you, Chair. And it's going to sound like question period, but the Department of Transportation and Public Works actually is the organization that looks after building schools, and you may wish to address that question to the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. The question, Minister, was that there is a 10% holdback The honourable member says she has heard of a situation where the contractor walked rather than honouring the commitments, and but it would be that department. They do manage the school construction.
Thank you. Member, you have the floor.
Nevertheless, I will take that up when we get an opportunity to speak to transportation, if I can get it in and around, among the many road questions. Yeah, at the same time, if the deficiencies are not addressed, then it is the schools and the teachers and the learning that might be compromised. So that should be something that your department would be aware of through your maintenance and your director who takes care of school buildings. So I think that is something that needs to be, perhaps just get on your radar screen is all, and be aware of it. And I will ask the question when I get an opportunity. Last year's budget for the maintenance of schools was cut. Can you tell me how we've done this year on the maintenance budget for schools?
The Minister of Education.
Last year, there's a rather complex explanation to that, that although it seemed like the absolute number was reduced, there was a shift in line items. If you add it all up, it's going to come out the same. It went from one category to the other. And I just wanted to remind the honourable member as well, is that when we had were able to do some reinvesting at the end of the last fiscal year, we put an additional $2 million back into the budget last year, which obviously will not be reflected on paper until this budget year, that budget year was closed off. The increase this year, we put back in the base budget this year the $1 million which you say was not there last year. So, but don't forget we added it up by the $2 million at the end of the year, so there's, and hopefully we would be in a position, Mr. Chair, perhaps to do that this year.
Clayton Park.
If I could then, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just I guess clarify that what you're saying really is that this year's budget brings you back to the level it would have been last year. So last year's was cut, but $2 million went in December. You were below what you'd been the year before until you put the $2 million in December. And this year's $1 million brings you back to that base level.
Thank you. The Minister of Education.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
The member from Halifax, Clayton Park.
I'd just like to point out that that does kind of contradict what you said, that it was in different line items and that it was the same last year. Okay, well, I am struggling to get the full gist of what it is there. On the construction of schools, can you tell me, I know there's only a few minutes left, but are you working closely on the building of what is the good word? I guess safe schools in terms of air quality and the timing of the installation of different things. For example, when do they finish the flooring in the gymnasium, the off-gassing of the various components of the school, that sort of thing, which I know in the Halifax West School, when it was built, there was a lot of emphasis on that, and I think they created a document which would or could be used as a model for future school building.
The Minister of Education with less than 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm trying to answer two questions. First of all, we're very conscious of that, and I appreciate the honourable member drawing that to the attention of the House. Secondly, there is a person who has been pretty well known dealing with the issues of air quality. The person's name is Karen Robinson, Mr. Chair, and I see the honourable member nodding her head. She knows her, and she's one of her advisors, and she sits on the committee. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are reminded of that by somebody who has had a lot of experience in it. And secondly, Mr. Chair, with your permission, just to go back to the last question, there was really two types of maintenance. There was the regular renovations and repairs, but then there is larger projects which fall under tangible capital assets, maintenance repairs. And that's where I was saying it's not quite the straightforward answer, because once some of the work was done under the TCA maintenance, and once that's gone, it doesn't have to be repeated. So.
Thank you. Member, you have just a half a minute left.
Yeah, I just wanted to rise for a second. I was pleased that the minister is aware of Karen Robinson. Her group, that was a nonprofit group, is called Citizens for a Safe Learning Environment. And I'm aware of that group because they've been active in my community and really across the province now. So I'm glad that you are recognizing the value of the information they bring to the table. I think they have done a lot to improve the health of our schools, right from simple things like the cleaning products that are used in schools up to some of the more complex issues of construction and materials that are selected to go into those schools. And I think that it's wonderful that you have begun to use that expertise that both Karen and others bring to the table. So I'll just close off with that. No question for you for my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Time for the estimates have elapsed. At this time, we'd like to recognize the Government House Leader.
Chairman, I move that your committees now rise and report considerable
Thank you. There's a
progress.
motion on. Thank you. Motion on the floor for the committee to rise. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House of Supply reports.
The committee has met and made considerable progress and begs leave to sit again.
Agreed? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 177, the Financial Measures 2005 Act?
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and speak on Bill number 177, the Financial Measures 2005 Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill is to support the government's budget that was introduced earlier several weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, this bill is like an appendix to the budget. This piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, ensures that the different measures that are introduced in the budget acts as the authorization that the government needs in order to implement them. Mr. Speaker, as you're well aware of, governing under a minority government puts additional pressure on the Premier and on the government. The government recognizes that they need support from the opposition in order to get this budget through the House and this Financial Measures Act, Mr. Speaker. This Tory minority government knows that if this bill doesn't pass, the government is defeated. Same thing applies to the budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I remember back in 1999 when the Liberal minority government's budget was defeated by the opposition. You know what happened then, Mr. Speaker? The House was dissolved immediately. There was no tomorrow. The House was dissolved immediately. An election was called. So again, what will happen this time around? Time will tell. Time will tell. Mr. Speaker, the most interesting part of this bill is the Debt Management Fund and the commitment to ensure that the $830 million offshore fund can't be used to balance the budget. In other words, the budget must be balanced without the offshore fund. While the intention is noble, Mr. Speaker, that is not what this government is doing. The reality is that $830 million is a key part of this budget, and without the offshore money, the surplus would be razor thin of $6 million, Mr. Speaker. If that's the case, then why is the government claiming this budget has a $63 million surplus? If this bill becomes law, then government must change that part of the budget. It's simply smoke and mirrors, just like the debt reduction plan. Mr. Speaker, the debt reduction plan is a sham. It will take until 2009 before the debt goes back to the levels of today, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, how can that be? How can the government say it's putting $830 million on the debt, but the debt will still grow by $90 million this year, Mr. Speaker? So here's what we have. Government claims a $63 million surplus. The debt is growing by another $90 million, and supposedly the $830 million offshore money is going to the debt. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like the government to explain that to Nova Scotians. How can the Premier say the $830 million is going to the debt, but the debt keeps growing, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, try to explain that one to the people of Nova Scotia. I sure can't. And I'm quite sure there's not too many people around here that can, including the Premier himself. Mr. Speaker, after all is said and done, this government is still borrowing $340 million this year. $340 million this year. So my question is, when will this going to stop? The Premier promised back in 1999, and then again in 2001, that the debt would stop growing. In fact, Mr. Speaker, let's look what the Premier has said about the debt, and we'll let Nova Scotians decide whether or not he told the truth. On April 17th, 2001, the Premier told this legislature, Mr. Speaker, and this is the Premier's word, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, what I will confirm is that a year from now, this government will introduce a balanced budget. And from that day onward, the debt of this province will no longer grow." That was on April 17th, 2001. So, Mr. Speaker, did the Premier break his promise? To me, certainly sounds like he did. Let's look at what the Premier said on March 25th, 2002. The Premier wrote in his article in the Chronicle Herald on that day, and I quote, "To be sure, there are some people who suggest that government should continue borrowing on its debt and spending beyond its means. I don't believe there is merit to this argument. Such an approach might feel good today. However, we need to ask ourselves, who pays for it tomorrow?" Those were the Premier's words back on March 25th, 2002. So yes, Mr. Speaker, who pays for it tomorrow? You know, that has been raised here time and time again. Mr. Speaker, the best opportunity, this is the best opportunity in 30 years to stop adding to the debt and start paying it down. This Premier is blowing that opportunity for a whole generation, Mr. Speaker. It's funny that back in 1999, the Premier wouldn't support our budget back when we were in the minority government, Mr. Speaker, because it added to the debt. And he voted against the budget because it added to the debt. Well, Mr. Speaker, since this Premier came to office, the debt has grown by $2.5 billion. You know, after he said he wouldn't add to the debt. So again, Mr. Speaker, $2.5 billion is the entire health budget this year. So again, $1 billion more has been added to the budget of the Department of Health.
Order, please. Will the honourable member allow for an introduction? The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova, an introduction, please.
I thank the honourable member. I'd like to bring your attention to the West Gallery this evening. We have young people visiting from Ottawa taking in the procedures. This is Evan Van Este and Erica Thornton. I'd like them to stand up and receive a warm welcome from the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly welcome our guests from Ottawa and hope they enjoy the proceedings. Welcome. The Honourable Member for Clare, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Speaker, and I too want to extend a warm welcome to our guests in the gallery. So again, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, since this Premier came to office, the debt has grown by $2.5 billion. After he made a personal commitment, he would not add to our provincial debt. Mr. Speaker, let's look again what the Premier told the Chronicle Herald on New Year's Eve in 2001. On June 18, 1999, the Conservative caucus voted against a budget with $600 million deficit. I told Nova Scotians that in good conscience, I could not support more debt. You know, those were the Premier's words. So the Premier now, in good conscience, does he stop adding to the debt? Just the opposite, Mr. Speaker. You know, the Premier does not have one iota of credibility when it comes to the debt of this province. He broke his promise, and he has already misled Nova Scotians time and time again. Mr. Speaker, looking at this bill, there's another section that certainly attracts attention. It's a tax credit for families. It's a tax credit that amounts to about $15 savings per child who is registered in a qualified sport or recreational activity. Mr. Speaker, this is a good measure, but it's only a half measure. Let me explain. Mr. Speaker, this tax credit raises a number of concerns. First of all, who decides what is a designated sport, or yet what is a recreational activity? You know, a couple things comes to mind. Does horseback riding, does that qualify? Does taking music lessons, does that qualify, Mr. Speaker, for this $15 savings? Mr. Speaker, I hope the Minister will provide us with a clear designation on what qualifies for a designated sport or for recreational activity, Mr. Speaker. Also, Mr. Speaker, who will administer this tax credit? You know, is it the Department of Finance, or is this program going to be handed over to Sports Nova Scotia? Also, Mr. Speaker, what plans are in place to ensure this program is inclusive? You know, I hope, and I'm sure every member of this House hopes, that every child in Nova Scotia may benefit from this new program. Mr. Speaker, but unfortunately, they won't. They won't. This tax credit only applies to families that pays income tax. So is that fair? Is that fair, Mr. Speaker? Some families will receive this tax credit, but others won't. Mr. Speaker, this tax credit reminds me when the Tory government decided to hand out those $155 checks before the last election in 2003. The Tory government said then that anyone who paid income tax in Nova Scotia in 2001, 2002, and 2003 would be eligible for the rebate. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, as you're well aware of, over 400,000 Nova Scotians were not eligible to get that $155 check. So again, Mr. Speaker, you know, these were the people who needed it the most. So again, with this tax credit, you know, what does the government decide to do? Some families will get this tax credit, and some families that could also benefit from this tax credit will not get it. So again, as I've said, this is not fair to these families or even yet to these children. So again, I hope that the government reconsiders this tax credit and makes it available to every child in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another section of this bill amends the film tax credit. I was pleased to see the film tax increase, but again, it does not match the one that the province of Manitoba offers. You know, and yet, further than that, the incentives to the film industry outside of Halifax are not adequate. So again, Mr. Speaker, our film industry has lots of potential to grow, but in order to grow, our film industry needs to be able to compete, you know, with its competitors. Mr. Speaker, the biggest disappointment is that there are no tax measures to stimulate the rural economy that was promised back in 1999. But like most other promises, it was also broken. Mr. Speaker, this bill highlights a series of disappointments rather than accomplishments. What we have is a government that has lost its way from what it had promised back in 1999. What we have is 6 years of missed opportunities, 6 years of neglecting our educational system, 6 years of increased fees and taxes, 6 years of neglecting our roads, and I could certainly talk about the roads in our riding, Mr. Speaker, in the municipality of Clare. There are many roads and many bridges that need some serious attention. 6 years of watching our offshore industry just slide away. 6 years of no growth in the tourism sector. And 6 years of skyrocketing tuition. 6 years of rural depopulation, watching our small communities slowly die. So where is the investment in rural Nova Scotia? This budget tries to make up for 6 years of lost opportunity. Mr. Speaker, the question on the minds of members is whether this government deserves our support. Our party understands, Mr. Speaker, the choices that government must make. The differences, however, Mr. Speaker, is our party had $1.8 billion less in revenues than the current government. $1.8 billion less. The Sable Project laid the foundation for growth throughout the first 6 years of this government. Where is the incentive to grow our offshore? Mr. Speaker, we've heard a good member from Cape Breton South last night talking about the offshore industry. You know, we have one project, the Sable Project. We don't have an industry, we have one project. Without the Sable Project, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't be debating this potential for $830 million in additional revenue. So furthermore, Mr. Speaker, many Nova Scotians, I'm sure, are asking themselves, what happens? What happens if the $830 million offshore fund does not come in? You know, that has been an ongoing debate for probably 4 weeks. For 4 weeks now, Mr. Speaker. You know, everyone has been following the events in Ottawa. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, nobody knows, not even the fortune teller on the government benches, what's going to happen in Ottawa. Nobody knows if that $830 million offshore fund is going to be received by our provincial government. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But we keep hearing, oh, we have commitments, you know, we have letters. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But people are asking what's going to happen if that money does not find its way to Nova Scotia. And that's a very good question to ask. if that money does not find its way to Nova Scotia, how is this going to affect our debt? Mr. Speaker, currently right now...
Order, please, now, Minister of Education on the point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I just was wondering whether the honourable member from Clare was saying that Liberal government was not going to honour its commitment, because I know certainly the Conservative Party intends to honour it.
The honourable member for Clare.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister knows quite well. The leader of the Federal Liberal Party, our current Prime Minister, Paul Martin, made a promise to the people of Nova Scotia. It was a promise kept, Mr. Speaker, not the series of promises that we've been hearing from this Premier, Mr. Speaker, that has gone on, that this Premier promised Nova Scotians he was not going to add to the debt. So maybe next time the Minister of Finance, Minister of Education rises on the next question, maybe he could provide us with clarification what the Premier meant back in '99 when he said he would not add more to the debt. And here we are in 2005, and we've added, another $2.5 billion to the debt. So again, might be interesting to hear. So again, does the honourable member from Yarmouth have a question? Maybe he has a question. No? Mr. Speaker, again, nobody knows what's going to happen. Will there be an election, a federal election? I don't know. If there is, Canadians will decide. I think everybody hopes that that $830 million offshore fund will come to Nova Scotia. But what happens if it doesn't? It will come. I've seen many promises over the years, many promises made, but many promises not kept. You just have to talk to the general people on the street, and I'm quite sure you'll hear an earful, Mr. Speaker, on what people out there think of politicians making promises. So again, I truly hope that Nova Scotia does benefit from this offshore deal, and we will get our $830 million. But of course, Mr. Speaker, we have to ask ourselves, how, if this money does not come in, how is this going to affect our debt? This year, our debt is supposed to grow to $12,471 million. That's a huge debt. If this money does not come in, how is this going to affect our budget, Mr. Speaker? If this money does not come in, how is it going to affect our forecasted surplus of $63 million? Again, if this money does not come in, how is this going to affect the funding announcements that were made in this budget, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, in closing, the government is receiving more than $500 million in extra revenue this year, more than $500 million. This government is borrowing this year an extra $340 million. Yet, they claim we're going to be finishing this current fiscal year with a $63 million surplus. But the debt will still grow by $90 million, Mr. Speaker. That's with the $830 million offshore fund. Mr. Speaker, our Premier has said more than once that he would not add to the debt. But he continues to do so year after year. Our Premier has said he would not burden future generations with more debt. But yet he does, Mr. Speaker. So we can be sure, Mr. Speaker, we can be sure our children will be paying this government's debt for years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to speak tonight about Bill 177, and it is the second part, I guess, of the confidence bills that are before this House for this government. Obviously, the first being the budget, and now the Bill 177 initiates a lot of what was in the budget. And I'll spend most of my time tearing the budget apart rather than building it up. No, I'm just being flippant, Mr. Speaker. But what I want to do, though, Mr. Speaker, is to make sure that our case for or against this budget has to be balanced, and it's much like the budget itself, not only in financial terms, and that's what sometimes governments lose sight of, is just the financial balancing of the books and not the social balancing of the books. Because we live in a province that is quite diverse. It's not only from the highlands of Cape Breton to the South Shore and to Cumberland County and Metro and the Valley region for the agricultural areas, and farming and fishing, Mr. Speaker. But we're a diverse province because of our economic situations. We are not a one-size-fits-all economic region. We have, by all estimations, a very strong and vibrant economy here in the metro area, and that's good. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I would say that in some terms they're using the kind of hub and spoke system of economic development, and obviously Metro being the hub and the spokes go out. But Mr. Speaker, that model, if you will, does not really apply in a diverse province like Nova Scotia. It just doesn't fly. The spokes can't stretch that far. So what you end up having is areas of this province with really poor economies. And so therefore, a budget should not be focused inward on an area like Metro and say, oh, this is going to work for everybody. Well, it's not, Mr. Speaker. The idea of what we can do with what we've got has to be laid out. It has to say, if there was a plan, and as we were told going into this budget, that this budget was, if you will, a vision. And the vision should be able to tell us that we're going beyond the thriving economy of Metro, and we're going to lay out how we're going to really turn the corner in economies of the area of this province where I come from, Mr. Speaker, because we're devastated. Some people say we're an economy in transition, and I don't say this, and this is not something that I blame on governments, previous or today's, but it's just the real fact that we live in an economy that's being devastated. And not a greater snapshot of that economy than the massive influx, or out-migration, I should say, of our young people. If you want a yardstick in which to measure which way your economy is going, look at which way your youth are going. And our youth are going south. And so therefore, our economy is going south, Mr. Speaker. And that's what I find hard to rationalize around this budget. I try to say, why would I support this budget? What's in this budget that helps my community? I have a community, Mr. Speaker, and Bill 77 there's nothing in there that says this is why you should support this member. That I get on a daily basis people coming in telling me they've just received a letter from Access Nova Scotia telling them that they owe this government money because of an overpayment from community services. And I'm saying, how do they expect these people of very small means to pay these bills back? Now, these are people with great pride, Mr. Speaker, that always had great pride in the fact that they paid their bills. But because of dire economic circumstances, they don't have the financial wherewithal to do this anymore. So they get this really innocuous letter from their government saying you owe us $4,000 because you happen to be in a car accident and you got a settlement of a few $1,000s. And now we find this out and you have to pay this to us. Now, that, these people didn't take this money and hide it somewhere. They didn't try to mislead anybody. It wasn't even money that was gotten by great providence. It was an injury inflicted on them. It was, in a lot of terms, money to help them get through their pain and suffering. But government says, no, we want that back. We want that dollar for dollar. So this innocuous letter will come to them and tell them that also you can expect in the very near future a letter from CCRA, and this letter will tell them that we will garnish any refunds from your income tax, and we'll garnish maybe your GST rebates. Now, Mr. Speaker, why do we place burdens on the poor like that? And there's no answer for that in Bill 177. Speaker, there's none at all. There is an answer in there for those who are of the greatest means, the large corporations. I see that there. And if it was fair, that wouldn't make me outraged. I would not be upset if everybody was growing exponentially in this province. I'd say that's good. Growth is good. But Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of people in this province aren't participating in this growth. Mr. Speaker, I tell you about groups or individuals, I should say, in my community, again, where community services have gone back to the 1960s. The 1960s, almost 45 years, saying that you owe us money. Now, Mr. Speaker, that begs a couple of questions, not the least of which is if these people were in any way, shape, or form defrauding the system for 45 years, how in the heck can you take 45 years to figure it out? Boy, you know what? Maybe we should get them working for the Department of Finance if they can hide numbers that good for that long. But, Mr. Speaker, that's not the reality of it. These are people that all of a sudden they will get a notice from government saying you owe us money with no explanation, no real quantified, qualified idea of how they've come up with the rationale for the amount of money that's owed. So we have a problem there. It's our lowest wage earners, or they're not even wage earners because they don't even reflect on the tax rolls because they don't pay enough to participate in the taxation system. And that brings me to some of the considerations that are in 177, and from time to time I may wander into the body of the bill, Mr. Speaker, and certainly I know that you, in your wise decision, if you feel I've gone too far, you'll drag me back to reality and say I'm not allowed to do this. But when we talk about some of the things in there, and allowing families, which would amount to $15 rebate for participating in sporting venues such as hockey, I would suppose, or soccer, or whatever. So we don't. These people of the most modest means will not participate in that rebate because they don't pay taxes. It's similar to the infamous $150 check that was allowed out there before the last election, and people were not. If you weren't on the tax rolls, you weren't eligible. So who really did it help? That is a real problem. This Bill 177 cannot say enough about its lack of vision for people in poverty. We're not even, we could talk about people that are poor. We can talk about people that are living at or near poverty, but these are people that are fully well engrossed in poverty because governments have failed to react and to help these people. So I've got to ask myself, why would anybody want to support this piece of legislation? Why would my community expect me to come up here and represent them and say, this is it. This is exactly, this is our budget. This is a hope for us. That's not it. Now, one of my friends across the way says it's a good budget, but for whom? Is it a good budget for everybody? No, it's not, Mr. Speaker. And it's a good budget for a slim number, a very slim number that this budget is universally good for. So, Speaker, this is what you have to ask yourself. And all members should ask themselves this question. Is it good? Is this bill a good bill for the New Waterford Consolidated Hospital? Is this bill, this budget, is that going to help alleviate the problems around the closure of the emergency room in New Waterford? It's closed more often than it's open. I would say no. We've put extra money into healthcare, but where is it at? Where is it going for doctors? Where is it going to help doctors in areas where there's basically what we would call class 4 hospitals that are in underserved areas? I would say the Inverness Consolidated Hospital, the Sacred Heart Hospital, the Waterford Consolidated Hospital, Buchanan Memorial, all those hospitals. Well, Straight Richmond's not in my community, but or not in the DHA that I belong to, but if the Minister of Tourism wants to throw her in, I'll lump it in too, Mr. Speaker, because I always want to see a smile on his face, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we'll throw that one in very gratuitously for the Minister of Tourism. He's looking after his good friend from Richmond, I'm sure. But, Mr. Speaker, these hospitals are the ones that have real problems with emergency room doctors, because what they are is they're hospitals without large population areas, but doctors and very few doctors to service the area. And what happens is a lot of these doctors aren't paid an hourly rate, but a fee for service. And this fee for service becomes a problem, because you're asking a doctor to cover an area, say we'll use a number from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. to try and operate their clinic, if you will, and service the emerge. So, a doctor can make more money by sitting in their office than going over and doing attendant care over at the emerge room. So what you have now is these areas that I talked about, and so that emergency location is harder or emergency services are harder to access for these people. Now, one has to realize that these are the people that are most in need of emergency care, because what a lot of these people are, because of some areas with doctor shortages, they're people that do not have a full-time physician, and for whatever reason, whether you agree with it or not, they use the emergency room as their doctor's office. And that's what happens. And people that are seniors, that's where they go to. And that's why it's important. So the idea of like the Canadian triage assessment system really isn't relevant in these hospitals, because by and large, you're not going to see a lot of the types of services that you would see in a tertiary care hospital or in a regional hospital that you would see in one of these level 4 hospitals, Mr. Speaker. The type of which we refer to as CTAS, is Canadian Tertiary Assessment System, Mr. Speaker. What you see coming in are people that with flus and strains and sprains, yet so they're not considered high level intense care. So a lot of times DHAs and the Department of Health do not see that system as one that we should locate a full-time emerge doctor to, because the rate of incidence is low, and the score on the CTAS level is low, and so therefore we don't really want to pay somebody large dollars an hourly rate. So what we'll do is we'll go a fee for service. And that fee for service causes a different pressure for these places. Because all those hospitals I mentioned previous, Mr. Speaker, are hospitals with large elderly populations. And they're the type of care, you know, it's been traditional. The argument about provinces going to Ottawa looking for health care dollars, the first thing they say, and I agree with them, when they go to Ottawa, they say, you cannot give us dollars for health care based on population. You know, you look at the population of Alberta. Now, what you have to look at there, obviously, is much greater than Nova Scotia's. But the idea that the ratio of seniors to people that don't, to young people is much less than it is here with an aging population. So what we do here, although our population is lower, the people that are in the primary area of extra giving or extra dollars spent in healthcare, we have an overabundance of them. And that's what we have to look at. But I don't think when budgets are proposed, and this goes back to what I said before about Bill 177, is it's not universal in its thinking. That it doesn't realize places like New Waterford and Baddeck and Neils Harbor and Inverness and Shetticamp and, you know, Richmond County, that, you know, we need to spend our dollars differently there. You know, whether it's, you know, that they take leadership and do something really honest and discernible about nurse practitioners, and is that the way to go? And engage those communities. And we talked about in this bill spending money in that direction. Is that the way to go? We don't know, Mr. Speaker, because the government is not engaging the population. It talks about its vision. It talks a lot about its vision. I mean, it purported that vision before it led the budget out, but it didn't tell us anything on it. So I would have liked to have seen this in Bill 177 and by extrapolation in the budget, but it wasn't there. I'll move on off of healthcare for a bit, Mr. Speaker, and I want to talk about, it was purported to be an education budget. You know, I've engaged the minister in question period on this one, and I've engaged him again in estimates on this, and I've told him that any time that I get a public opportunity to talk about a school for the town of Dominion, I'm going to use it. And you know what, Mr. Speaker, if I didn't stand in my place every time I had to have a chance to speak about the disastrous thing that happened to those people in the town of Dominion, I'd be remiss, and I don't deserve to stand here and represent them if I don't at least talk about it and pursue that with as much vigor as I can. Because, Mr. Speaker, they lost a school that was the centerpiece of their community, not because of enrollment wasn't there, not because the school wasn't meeting the expectations of the community, not that the community didn't want it, but because of an accident of being built over an old coal mine, and then it incurred subsidence. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that's an issue that you can understand from the area of this province that you come from, with its rich coal mining history. And it's an odd thing, you know, I think it's the way we fool ourselves and talk about coal mining as a rich history, because it's often more tragic than it is rich. But I think out of that adversity, it makes us all a little stronger. And I think maybe that's the way we couch it. We say it's rich, but it truly was. And you know, Mr. Speaker, again, I say to you, you know this as well, if not better than I do, about the tragedy of coal mining. But this was another tragedy, not life-taking tragedy, but it was a tragedy of proportions that really devastated a community that saw itself as this. This is a small community that saw this as much as it saw its rink, as it saw its churches. It saw this role as being so pivotal in the community, Mr. Speaker. So we have these things, but yet we've lost it. And what we, you know, what governments will tell us today, well, there's an excess of classrooms in Glace Bay, and there's some in New Waterford, which are not untruths. The minister is being perfectly honest. But I keep saying the point the government misses on this is what schools mean to the community. It's not, we just can't say that schools are here and play no regard for what it means for the community. And that's where I go back to budgets have to have, obviously, the financial component to it, but it has to have a social component to it, that we know that we're investing in our communities, that in years to come, if what federal government money is being spent in Cape Breton, if they're telling us we're turning the corner, well then you know what? Put your money where your mouth is. Let's build a school there. So when that economy does make that big turn, that they can turn themselves right into a school, that the school will be there to educate the children. But Mr. Speaker, what we're seeing here, by denying that community a school, when you deny that school, you admit to what you don't need community schools. You'll just use the existing facilities and move on. So that's wrong, Mr. Speaker. That's wrong for a lot of ways. And so we don't see that. We don't see that type of vision for communities and indeed for education in Bill 177 or indeed in the budget. So what we have to do is say, look, well, let's look at, you know, I'll move off and maybe shortly I'll adjourn debate, Mr. Speaker, and come back another day. But Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about, you know, we look at labor capital funds. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is a far piece off of what I just talked about, but what it is, labor capital funds are funds that, you know, that are, you know, are, again, I'll use the phrase, I've talked about community, they are community-based funds in a lot of ways. And when you look at it, if you were to go into the body of this bill and look at it, we'll say, that how government is trying to regulate these is if you read the bill, is in a very negative light. And when I first read it, that was my reaction of why would government be so negative about labor capital funds? But when you get it explained to you, Mr. Speaker, you realize that what it is, it's really a mechanism they're looking forward, and I agree with it, and I support it. It's a mechanism that would go in and be able to punish the funds or write the funds, rather than the only option that was open before was to shut the funds down, which was really not a good thing. You would wipe it out, and this way here, it would give government the control to come in and say, I shouldn't say just government, the regulatory body, the right to come in and look at the funds and say, okay, look, we're going to kind of levy out some penalties here, but we're not going to shut down the fund because, you know, that's counterproductive. So if the bill was to go forward, that's a positive thing, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, these are things that we see that it's in Bill 177. There's, from a financial perspective, I'm not as kind of confused about this government, about their direction financially. My real problem with this government is more socially where they're going to go, and that's a road that you talk about unpaved roads, and that's where I'll go when I get some more time, Mr. Speaker. But at this point, Mr. Speaker, I think the hour is drawing late, and I would move adjournment for this evening, Mr. Speaker, on debate.
Motion is to adjourn debate on Bill 177. Is it agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Government House Leader on tomorrow's hours and order of business.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow being Opposition Day, the Honourable Member for Clare will tell us what the business is for tomorrow and the hours.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow we will be calling Bill 151, the Water Royalty Act, and Bill 170, the Employment Tax Act, for our Opposition Day business tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, the House tomorrow will sit from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Thank you.
Motion is the House adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned to 2 p.m. tomorrow.